Imagine having everything money can buy, and still feeling completely empty. It seems impossible, doesn't it? But this is precisely the trap many fall into. They accumulate achievements and collect applause, while their hearts cry out for something priceless. The world says success brings happiness, but what if it's just the opposite? What if, in seeking everything, we end up missing the essential? This is one of those exciting stories show turn the world upside down. A man who seemed to have made it in life discovers that true failure is being surrounded by people, and still being alone. But fate had other plans. It would put in his path someone who had nothing, but carried what he needed most: true love, hope, courage, and dignity. Brace yourself, because what you're about to see isn't a fairy tale. It's a real journey of transformation, forgiveness, vulnerability, and connection. And when it's over, you may never look at success, love, and life the same way again. But be careful. This story hides a twist that will challenge everything you believe about what truly makes someone happy. Rafael Montero stood before the mirror that took up nearly the entire wall of his closet. Surrounded by dozens of Italian suits lined up with military precision, the air conditioning blew a constant chill, but inside there was only a scorching desert. On the outside, he looked like a man who had succeeded in life: luxurious penthouses, sports cars, helicopter rides. Inside he felt like a stranger within his own name. Each achievement that should have brought peace only reinforced the echo of emptiness. It was one of those thrilling stories the world romanticizes, but which he lived like a silent prison. Fame had brought him applause, but never connection. Success had given him power, but never purpose. He thought of the women who had passed through his life like someone leafing through old magazines. Beautiful, fragrant, dazzling, and all as cold as marble. They desired him, yes, or at least desired what he represented. But none of them seemed to see the man behind the bank account. Rafael was beginning to believe that perhaps true love was just a publicity fantasy, a myth people repeat to endure the grind. The problem was that, even knowing this, his chest throbbed like a caged animal. He felt that if he continued living on autopilot, he would eventually drown in his own luxury, and no one would notice, nor would they care. That was the part that hurt the most. The invisibility within fame. The click of a notification on his phone broke the silence. It was Rodrigo, his partner and friend since college. "We closed the Singapore deal. Congratulations, genius," the message said. Rafael stared at those words and felt nothing, neither pride nor joy, only profound boredom. He dropped his phone on the king-size bed and buried his face in his hands. If all of this made no sense, what else could he do? An unlikely idea began to form, like a streak of lightning on the horizon. What if he erased everything? What if he shed the weight of the Montero surname and was just someone? No black card, no bodyguards, no French perfume, just skin, bones, and vulnerability. Maybe then he could discover if there was still dignity in the world, and if anyone could see him without the armor. The idea seemed insane, but the more he thought about it, the more it gained strength. It was as if every cell in his body screamed for transformation, for a violent break with that sterile life. He wanted to test people, or perhaps he wanted to test himself. If someone were capable of loving him when he had nothing, then that love would be true. There would be no doubts, no hidden agendas. It would be like digging deep until he touched the solid ground of someone's soul. A love that can't be bought, that can't be seduced by numbers, only by humanity. It was a colossal risk for someone accustomed to controlling every variable. But paradoxically, it seemed like the wisest choice he'd made in years. Sometimes, courage is born from desperation. Determined, he went down to the basement of the penthouse where he stored forgotten tools and objects. He rummaged through boxes until he found a pair of ripped jeans, a paint-stained t-shirt, and a pair of worn sneakers he'd worn when he still painted his own furniture. Each piece he wore seemed to tear away a piece of his former identity. He messed up his hair, rubbed dirt on his sleeves and face, and for a moment, not even he recognized himself in the mirror. That figure staring back at him with tired eyes seemed to have come from a distant reality of alleyways and survival. Curiously, he felt lighter, as if he were returning the character to the dressing room. There, for the first time in years, there was only Rafael. No titles, no defenses, no shields. Just a man stripped of certainties, but carrying a stubborn hope. That next morning he left well before sunrise. He wanted to reach the city center before the influx of suited executives. He chose to sit on the sidewalk in front of his own company building a mirrored glass skyscraper, a symbol of his glory. He found it ironic to become invisible right there where everyone feared and adulated him. He spread an old cap on the ground as if begging for change and hunched over, trying to disappear amidst the hurried steps. For hours, the world passed over him. No one saw him. Some looked away in disgust. Others laughed. Others pretended he was air. It hit him like silent blows. He thought of how many times he himself had done the same to anonymous people at traffic lights, on subways, on city corners. He felt shame, and a new kind of pain, the pain of being treated as none. The sun rose and the asphalt began to burn. Hunger was already gnawing at his stomach when a soft voice reached him. "Hey, are you okay?" Rafael looked up and found a face that seemed to glow against the gray sidewalk. A young woman, dressed simply, with wide-eyed eyes and steady hands holding a worn purse. Clara Nogueira. There was a trace of haste in her eyes, but stronger than that was something rare, genuine concern. She showed no pity, no superiority, only care. Can I help you with anything? She asked breathlessly. Raphael hesitated, trying to appear fragile. I'm just going through a rough patch. I have nowhere to stay. Clara opened her purse without a second thought, took out a few crumpled bills, and handed them to him. It's not much, but you can buy some bread around the corner. Raphael stood frozen. Those few bills might have been her lunch. It wasn't money, it was sacrifice. He felt a lump in his throat. Thank you. You didn't have to. Everyone needs help sometimes, she replied with a small but bright smile. My name is Clara. If you're still around tomorrow, come find me. I don't have much, but I can share. She ran into the building. Late, Raphael stood holding the money, paralyzed. All morning, dozens of well-dressed people had passed by without looking at him. Clara, who clearly had little, stopped. She saw him, and that was the difference that tore him apart the most. For the first time in a long time, someone had treated Raphael like a human being, not like a position, not like a walking bank account. He bought a loaf of bread at the recommended bakery but couldn't eat it. He was numb inside. He spent the rest of the day sitting on the sidewalk, as if guarding a secret. When he returned to the penthouse, Marina, his housekeeper, was surprised by his condition. But Raphael changed the subject and went straight up to his room. He couldn't stop thinking about Clara, her direct manner, her clear gaze, the calm firmness of someone who carries the world on her shoulders and still finds space to care for a stranger. Her image repeated in his mind like a soft, uncomfortable song, and then he knew he would return the next day. He needed to understand where that strength came from. Perhaps, in the quick smile of a woman in a hurry, there lay the beginning of the life change he had been seeking for years without knowing he was seeking it. Raphael woke before his alarm. His body was crying out for sleep. His mind was crying out for meaning. The ceiling in his room seemed lower, as if the covering had shrunk overnight. He picked up a notebook he hadn't used in years, a gift from his mother, leather-bound, smelling of the past, and scribbled 3 words that didn't fit with his public biography: truth, courage, hope. The handwriting was shaky, almost childish, but the gesture anchored him. He put on his worn clothes again, his worn sneakers, his cap. Looking in the mirror, he didn't see the CEO. He saw a man begging life for forgiveness. He descended in the elevator, his heart pounding in his chest, a silent prayer hammering that someone, just today, would see the inside of him. He arrived earlier than the day before and took the same spot on the sidewalk, leaning against the cold wall. The air carried the scent of bread baking on the corner and diesel buses braking at the traffic light. The hours passed in lead shoes. A group of young people laughed loudly. A woman swerved in fear. A man in a suit said something about laziness without lowering his voice. Raphael felt the word dignity throbbing like an open wound. He realized that, to those in a hurry, poverty seems like a moral diagnosis, not a circumstance. And at that moment, a shadow fell across the sunlight. You're here, she said unceremoniously. Crouching down beside him, Clara, he smiled the way only those who know pain can smile, sweetly, without pity. The smile of someone who says, I see you, without invading. Did you manage to eat yesterday? Raphael nodded, and the yes came out more grateful than he intended. He watched as she set her bag on the floor and pulled out a foil package. I made an extra snack. It's not much, but it's made with love. He held the lunchbox as if receiving a secret. The simple smell of rice, beans, and seasoned chicken dismantled any old defenses. Vulnerabilities, he thought, sometimes, of warm food passed from hand to hand. Thank you, Clara. He didn't say you didn't have to. He already understood that it would lessen her gesture. I'll be fine. Yes, you will, he replied without emphasis, as if blessing. Then he looked at his watch, made a slight face. There's always a Donna Carmen in our lives, and added, if you want, I can come by again after work. We can think of a plan. Good people don't get lost. They just get a little disorganized. The sentence vibrated in the air like a bell. Hope she left, and the morning seemed less harsh. Raphael opened his lunchbox but ate slowly, reveling in the sincerity of the seasonings. Between bites, his memory tugged at a memory. His mother, in the small childhood apartment, saying that food is affection that we chew. His stomach warmed. His soul, too. There was a time when familiar was not a decorative word of an institutional campaign. A time when purpose smelled of coffee brewed through a cloth strainer. The clock dragged on until late afternoon, and when the doors of the building began to pour out, one of them didn't get through, came to him. Clara looked for him. When she saw him, she smiled again, but now there was an invisible question accompanying the smile. Who are you, really? They walked to the nearby square, where gnarled trees provided modest but faithful shade. They sat on a wooden bench. Clara didn't care about the dust on his clothes. She cared about the pain behind her eyes. Tell me how you got here, she asked bluntly, as those with no time to waste do. Raphael took a deep breath and pieced together a version of the past that wasn't a lie, but didn't reveal his world. His mother gone, a lost job, a string off, the feeling of having forgotten how to breathe. As he spoke, he noticed his own body settling into simple words. He no longer needed the rhetoric of events. He needed the grammar of life. Clara listened without interrupting, with the kind of attention that is rare and precious. When he finished, she rested a hand on his arm in a short, firm gesture. "You don't look like you've given up," she said. "You just look tired." Tiredness passes. Giving up sticks. The phrase tickled his soul, and he almost laughed. Almost he preferred to observe the way the late afternoon light bit into her face, highlighting small freckles that the day's stress couldn't erase. He noticed Clara's enduring beauty then. Not a showcase beauty, but courage of those who wake up early, that transformationally life of those who choose to get up even without guarantees. Beautiful are the people who carry the world and still make room for others. "And you?" Raphael asked, feeling a pure curiosity, without invasion. "What brought you here?" Clara shrugged with a smile, without complaint. She told him about her mother, Mrs. Lucia, the extra cleaning, the San Megloff 6 years drawing astronauts and scrolls, of nursing school interrupted in the 5th semester, of bills that multiply when we breathe. He spoke without drama, with the sobriety of someone who manages wind and works miracles with little. Resilience. It wasn't a slogan there. It was logistics. "Sometimes I think about going back to school," he said, looking at the branches. "But time is precious. Pricey," Raphael repeated in his mind, noticing that this hurt him in a new way. The time he always had in abundance, she lacked. Social injustice has different clocks. EU. I could say that, on that park bench, two geographies met, that of empty abundance and that of scarcity full of. Raphael realized, in a flash, that true love perhaps it was less about feeling and more about learning to see. He saw, for example, that Clara kept her nails short, worn down by cleaning products, but there was a care in them that was minimal. He also saw that, when she spoke of her son, her voice took on a shine that no expensive jewelry can duplicate. And he saw that, when she spoke of her mother, her eyelid trembled, that tremor that betrays an old weariness trying not to turn into bitterness. There, in that tremor, he understood that connection is seeing the detail that the world ignores. When night fell, they agreed to see each other the next day. It was a casual arrangement, the kind that doesn't require a signature, just a presence. Raphael returned home overcome with a mild uneasiness. He took a long shower, but the hot water didn't wash away his uneasiness. He opened his laptop and typed her name in the search bar. The profile was simple, with rare photos, almost no poses. In an old image, Clara wore a half-finished white coat. The caption, "One day I'll be back," 3 likes. A comment from his mother, "Proud of you, daughter." Raphael felt a surge of tenderness and ... blame at the same time. Tenderness for the suspended dream, guilt for being there, hiding her own life. She leaned her forehead against the window pane. The city spread out at her feet like a poorly distributed constellation. Whoever loves in truth, would you lie like that? Whoever loves in truth, would you lie like that? The early morning was a battlefield. My mind was telling me that the experiment needed to continue if I wanted robust proof. The chest warned that playing with real feelings charges high interest. It was a conflict aptuous as persist in the disguise to complete the thesis, or dismantle the armor before anyone got hurt. He didn't come to a conclusion. He put the notebook away on the nightstand, as if sealing a temporary pact, just a few more days, just until he could understand if what he felt was just fascination or life-changerizing. Sleep came, short and restless. He dreamed of a torn check and a child's drawing of 4 people holding hands. He woke with a racing heart and a fragile decision to go back. On the 3rd day, the city woke up gray and, curiously, clearer. Raphael took his usual spot and waited. When Clara appeared, she didn't rush in. She came in presence. She sat almost close, as if refusing the distance society imposes on the invisible. "I brought another lunchbox," she said, and laughed to herself. "I think I've developed a taste for cooking for you." The verb for you found a bare spot in him. "You make me believe it's possible to start over," he said, without planning. Clara frowned gently. "Yes, it is. But starting over isn't magic. It's a method. Transformation is done with short, repeated steps, not with ornamental leaps." And he listed, naturally, 3 microtasks that he used to suggest to his own neighbor. Sorting documents, looking for shelter, listing job openings by neighborhood. Practical examples. Simple, but with a scent of possibility. Raphael listened to her as if receiving a map, and as she spoke there was something new in Raphael. The strange joy of being guided. Someone who had always led now experienced the humility of learning. It reconditioned his emotional muscles, and at the same time, something new emerged in Clara, a cautious trust in that unknown man, a desire to believe that good encounters still exist in exciting stories of real life. Caution was accompanied by hope, that stubborn hope that insists on living where statistics advise against it. "Can I ask you a question, Raphael?" she said, testing the weight of the name. "Yes, when you look at me, what do you see?" The question, as simple as a glass of water, disarmed him. He blinked slowly, as if searching within rather than within his repertoire. "I see someone who carries the whole house in their chest and still makes room for a stranger," he replied, surprised by his own sincerity. "I see..." and a kind of joy of service I hadn't heard of. Clara laughed, disconcerted. Joy of service is a nice name for paid fatigue. It's more than fatigue, he insisted. It's purpose. She didn't reply. She remained silent, a silence that accepted being seen. In some silences lies the beginning after love, not the sugary romance, but the love that recognizes and honors over the next few days. The ritual repeated itself. A brief meeting in the morning, a longer conversation in the evening. Raphael began to notice that Clara's steps had a little music, that she counted the time on her watch not out of anxiety, but out of responsibility, that every conversation about her son ended with a sparkle in her eye, as if returning to the source. In contrast, Clara began to notice that Raphael's eyes held an old, somewhat secretive sadness, which sometimes hid behind a light-hearted joke. She also noticed that his posture, even in his worn clothes, bespoke another life, an erect back, precise vocabulary, hands that had already written much. True recognizes clues. Dignity, it's not fantasy, it leaks out in the gesture. One afternoon, Clara brought a notebook and insisted he write down 3 goals for the week, the kind that fit in a day's pocket. 1. Find a place in a decent shelter. 2. Reissue a document. 3. List 2 informal employment locations. Raphael wrote with childlike care. His hand trembled less than on the first day. His heart trembled more. In the corner of the page, without her seeing, he scribbled another goal: not to lie forever. It wasn't a decision. It was a wish for Givonessus, not born where Thetra was exiled, said a voice that reminded him of his mother. He closed the notebook as if guarding a secret in its infancy. One night, back at the penthouse, Raphael came across Marina, who knew him like few others. You're different, she said, with the care of someone who doesn't invade. Different how? Less heavy. When we meet purpose, even the air changes. He laughed. Purpose is a big word for me, Marina. Big words fit big people, and you just needed to remember. Her words touched a place he'd been avoiding, the memory of his mother, the old letters he hadn't read out of fear, the collection of awards without affection. Luxury was a very tidy wardrobe for such a crushed soul. The next day, she took a book her mother loved to the square, a worn edition of a classic. Clara arrived, saw the title and smiled in surprise. My grandmother used to read this book to me, she said, her eyes shining. It's kind of tragic, but full of hope between the lines. They talked about reading, cheap music that soothes, movies that make you cry with laughter. They laughed at micro-realities, the elevator in the cleaning building that gets stuck, the coffee at the bakery that improves when the girl at the counter sings. Small T's were sewn there, with everyday thread, no epic scenes, just connection on that when it rained down it did. They ran under the awning, laughing like teenagers. Raphael soaked, felt a kind of unpretentious happiness that money never gave him. The joy of being alive together. It was then that an external noise threatened the little paradise set that they built. From afar, Rodrigo, the friend and business partner, was crossing the sidewalk, talking on his cell phone. Raphael stiffened, pulled his cap, and turned his face away. His heart, a traitor, shifted gears. Clara noticed the sudden change and glanced in the same direction, curious. His friend passed by unnoticed, a gust of elegant perfume cutting through the light rain. The threat receded but left a trail. That split second, the fantasy of the experiment met the edge of the real world. There was a hook. Thought was not yet going to fire, but its spring was cocked, and like every Boac-sighting stories, this would also require the invoice after that night. Raphael opened the leather-bound notebook and wrote, I admire her. Then he added, I don't deserve her. Yet the word yet let a crack. He realized that life change, it's not just jumping off a bridge, it's learning to swim in the cold, every day. The phone vibrated. A message from Rodrigo with an invitation to a dinner with investors. He turned off the screen. It wasn't an escape. It was, for the first time in a long time, a choice that didn't involve a chart, a KPI, or a headline. It involved rice, beans, rain, laughter, familiar of someone he barely knew and yet already respected as if they were guardians of what was left of humanity in him. At the end of the week, Clara appeared, her eyes more tired than usual. Mommy didn't sleep well, she explained, adjusting her bag. And Miguel has a bad cough. Do you want to go today? He asked impulsively. I can buy medicine. Clara gently raised her hand, curbing his fix-it reflex. Thanks, but we'll manage. He nodded, learning to respect Thetra. Death it protects dignity of someone who has already given up a lot. But if you want, you can find me later. A good conversation helps keep your head from falling apart. And he smiled tiredly, but brightly. Later, on the park bench, she told 2 short stories that would form a thesis on true love. The neighbor who fixes other people's showers for free when his daughter visits, and the pharmacy clerk who, instead of pushing the most expensive medicine, asks what's really going on. The world isn't lost, Raphael, it's just very noisy. Sometimes true whispers. He smiled, because he was learning to hear whispers, and because, in that learning, there was a kind of forgiveness that started with you. The meeting ended with a small scene, enormous on the inside. Clara pulled an A4 sheet of paper with a colored drawing from her bag. It's Miguel's, she said unceremoniously. 4 people held hands. A woman with her hair tied up, a boy in a superhero cape, a lady with a cane, and a man in a cap. He asked me to give it to you. The to give it to you stopped everything inside Raphael. He held the drawing with both hands, as if receiving a sacrament. He didn't know that so much could live on bond paper. Hope I didn't know that acceptance could be so light and yet so devastating. I didn't know, above all, that I was committing still a crime again. Had joy and guilt. There. Made peace for a few seconds. But they knew it wouldn't last. When he got home, the drawing went on the fridge, the notebook on the table, and he went to the window. The city remained sleepless, as always, but something about it seemed more possible. Raphael mentally reviewed the route he had taken, from empty to the disguise, from disguise to omitting from the meeting to... There was the promise of a story that, if told on stage, would make people cry and sign commitments to themselves. But there was also this is crucial, a stun grenade, belief it sustained the experience, and bombs, sooner or later, explode. He pressed his forehead against the glass and made a promise, though he didn't yet know how to keep it. I won't hurt her, and, like all promises made late at night, it sounded beautiful enough to allow him to sleep. Late at night, it sounded beautiful enough to allow him to sleep. The next morning, Raphael didn't go to the sidewalk. He woke up separated into two men, one who wanted to finish the test, and the other who wanted to finish with theater. The first argued with numbers, statistics, method. The second spoke of people, affection, purpose, the half that chose the square one. He walked there with measured steps, each one weighing the cost after as he sat down. He noticed that it was drizzling today, and the city seemed more honest under the leaks. Clara arrived with a patched umbrella. She smiled. Always hurt. Today you're going to listen to me without trying to fix anything, she announced, before any other topic. Deal, he said, grateful for clear instructions. And then she spoke of losses that don't appear on the bank statement, postponed dreams, declined invitations, the mother's pain, the child's fever, that no you give yourself when your body asks for rest and life asks for more. Raphael didn't advise, he just stayed. And he discovered that stay is a more expensive verb. He also discovered that, for certain wounds, medicine is presentient. It was there, in the drizzling rain and the quiet words, that he understood that what he felt wasn't sociological curiosity, it was care. The kind of care that asks, have you eaten yet? And, if the answer is not yet, divides half. The kind of care that moves small mountains, standing in line, holding the door, listening until the end. The kind of care that money can finance. But Neveto replaced. He lowered his eyes and blurted out, Clara, there's something about me you need to know. But he didn't say it. He swallowed the sentence when he saw, in the distance, a familiar silhouette stop in front of the glass building. Fate has to ming himself. And sometimes he is cruel to make the plot work. The silhouette, for now, doesn't interest us. This is the end of chapter 1. A divided man, a luminous woman, a drawing stuck on the refrigerator of a disguised millionaire. There is true love being born. Maybe there is, definitely. And when Theatre Ribs he charges admission to everyone present, including you who are listening to this story on Monday morning. Raphael woke up before his alarm again, but this time his chest didn't feel empty. He felt something rare, almost forgotten, expectation. Not the mechanical anticipation of reports or meetings, but the kind that made his stomach tingle like before an important meeting in adolescence. He ran his hands over his face, trying to ignore the mirror that always showed him the image of the man everyone applauded and no one knew. He exchanged his silk robe for old wrinkled clothes that already carried the smell of the street. Strange how, in just a few days, the disguise had stopped feeling like a fantasy and started feeling like who he really was, as if each time he donned those rags. Rafael Monteiro, the successful businessman. What's fading and only Raphael emerged, a man trying to relearn how to be a person. He left home before sunrise, while the city was still yawning. The silent rooftop remained behind, like a museum of achievements that no longer moved him. He took the subway, something he hadn't done in at least a decade, and was surprised by the complicit silence of the passengers. Each one seemed to carry an invisible world on their shoulders. Suddenly, he no longer felt like an intruder among the living. He felt part of humanity. Dignity, he realized, doesn't live in the clothes one wears, but in the courage with which one insists on living. He smiled to himself, and a lady beside him smiled back, as if she had read his mind. This warmed him. Little sparks of hope and light entire fires when they are on the verge of extinction. When he reached the sidewalk in front of his company's mirrored building, Clara was already there. She walked slowly, her hair tied up messily and her eyes half closed with sleep. She carried a cooler bag in her hand. I brought coffee, she said, as if it were a mere detail. But Raphael knew better. He knew that woman had probably woken before dawn, made the coffee while she was getting his son and his mother ready, and yet she had thought of him. That simple gesture carried more weight than any $1 million contract he had ever signed. You didn't have to, he began. But Clara raised an eyebrow. You did. Coffee is almost an act of resistance. And she smiled, a tired but firm smile, like a flag on a stormy day. As he sipped the warm coffee that tasted like home, Clara spoke of Miguel, who was beginning to spell his first words on his own, and of Donna Lucia, who had spent the night with hip pain. There was weariness in every sentence, But Alcé Karajafail listened to her with silent reverence. He discovered that Clara's world was made of unavoidable deadlines, persistent bills, and small logistical miracles. And yet, she smiled. He thought about how his life was the opposite. Nothing was missing, but everything seemed slippery, shapeless. Sometimes scarcity is more concrete than abundance, and perhaps that's why Clara emanated something he envied: purpose. The purpose of surviving with love, of caring even when exhausted, of continuing even when no one applauded. That was what he hungered for and didn't know it. "You know what I think?" Clara said, putting away the empty mug. "The problem isn't falling, it's forgetting you can get up." "You speak as if you have fallen many times," remarked Raphael. "Yes, but I also learned that resilience sights, a sport of repetition," he replied, smiling. "Like brushing your teeth, if you stop, it gets rusty." Raphael laughed out loud, and Clara seemed surprised that he was laughing. There was something beautiful about that laugh. It wasn't a joke. It was a relief. At that moment, Raphael began to experience what he had been looking for in therapies, books and expensive retreats for years: human connection. A kind of joy that is not euphoria, it is peace. In the days that followed, the routine solidified like a silent choreography. Clara would show up with a different lunchbox each morning: rice with vegetables, pasta with garlic and oil, sometimes just bread and banana. Raphael feigned surprise, but inside, he collected each dish like someone archiving proof that he still exists. Kindness in the world. In return, he offered what he could without breaking his disguise. Listening. He discovered that truly listening to someone is rare, and that most people just wait their turn to speak. Clara, on the other hand, seemed to speak not to impress, but to share the burden. And by sharing, the burden became lighter for both of them. There, on the sidewalk, amidst honking horns and hurried footsteps, something was born that he didn't have the courage to name, but that his heart recognized. True love in an embryonic state. In the afternoons, he would accompany her to the nearby square, where they would sit on the wooden bench that already recognized their outlines. There, Clara spoke of her interrupted dreams. She wanted to go back to college, finish her nursing degree, but she said it as if she were talking about a distant city she might never visit. "When Miguel grows up, who knows?" she murmured, looking at the ground. Raphael felt like saying, "I can afford it," but he swallowed the sentence like someone holding fire in his mouth. He knew that any insinuation about money would tear the fragile bridge off Trustat they were beginning to build. So, instead of offering solutions, he offered presence. "You can still do it, Clara," he said, with a firmness that surprised him. "Dreams don't expire. They just fall asleep. Sometimes they wait for courage," he added, more to himself than to her. Clara stared at him for a second, and there was a different glow, as if she'd seen for an instant who he really was or who he could be. Then she looked away, embarrassed by her own thought, and changed the subject, asking if he knew how to cook. Raphael lied that he didn't, even though he'd taken courses with star chefs just to impress investors at corporate dinners. He found it curious how, with Clara, he wanted to be less, not more. With the whole world, he'd spent his life trying to appear bigger than he was. With her, he wanted to be only real. Perhaps because Clara dealt with True like someone who handles water, there was no need to display it, just offer it. And that, for Raphael, was mesmerizing. One rainy afternoon, Clara arrived with soaked shoulders and a tired smile. They sat under the awning, and she pulled a folded piece of paper from her pocket. It was a drawing by Miguel, 4 figures holding hands, one wearing a cap just like Raphael's. He said, "You're part of our family now," he said, laughing awkwardly. Raphael remained silent, his eyes fixed on the drawing. It pierced his defenses more precisely than any criticism. Family was a word he'd always used in marketing campaigns, but now it felt real, alive, pulsing in colored pencil strokes. He felt a lump rise in his throat. "Can I keep it?" he asked, his voice breaking. "Of course," Clara replied, surprised by his emotion. He didn't know that, at that moment, Raphael was signing a silent pact to protect that family, even from afar. As she talked about the cost of her mother's medicine and the math lessons she tried to teach Miguel at night, Raphael watched her with the attention of someone witnessing an everyday miracle, and he realized something. He was beginning to live for his meetings with her. His entire day revolved around those late afternoon conversations. Work, which had previously consumed him, now seemed like an obstacle between him and Clara. He even made up plans to avoid meetings, something he'd never done before. Rodrigo began to notice. He sent short messages, full of periods: "You're acting strange, you've disappeared again. The company doesn't run itself." Raphael read them and didn't respond. For the first time, the company seemed too small to contain everything he felt. The company seemed too small to contain everything he felt. A&I. That's where there cracks in the disguise. The more Raphael became involved with Clara, the harder it became to maintain the charade. It was like trying to hold water with open hands. Small details began to slip away. His vocabulary, for example, occasionally he would say unusual words, which made Clara frown, or his automatic gestures like thanking the waiter by name, something homeless people rarely do. Clara noticed, but didn't comment. Maybe out of kindness, maybe because she didn't want to spoil a good thing, but her watchful eyes always seemed to ask silent questions he couldn't answer. One of those afternoons Clara arrived, visibly exhausted. She had dark circles under her eyes and a hoarse voice. "I slept for 2 hours," she confessed, laughing nervously. "Miguel had a fever, and my mother felt sick, but everything's fine." "No, it's not," Raphael said before he could stop himself. Clara raised her eyebrows. "You sound like you can fix everything," she said, her tone not accusatory but warning. "Sometimes things just need time, not fixing." Raphael remained silent, swallowing the lesson. He was used to solving everything with money and speed, but here, with Clara, none of that worked. It required patience, presence, and listening, and perhaps that was exactly what he needed to learn. That life change you don't buy it, you build it. In the following days, Raphael began performing small anonymous acts of kindness. He discreetly left fruit for Clara at the bakery she passed by, paid for Miguel's lunch at the school cafeteria without her knowing, bought her mother's medicine and asked the pharmacist to give it as a gift. He did this not out of guilt, but out of a new impulse, careful. Yet each gesture was accompanied by a pang of blame because it was still a lie. He was helping with one hand and deceiving with the other. Vulnerability. Clara, who trusted him, made that lie heavier and heavier, but he couldn't stop. He was addicted to the sparkle in her eyes when she talked about Miguel, the way she smiled with half her mouth, the way the world seemed less harsh when she was around. Then came the day that would change everything. It was a sunny Friday, and Clara arrived more dressed up than usual, a simple but pretty dress that accentuated her lightness even when tired. Raphael was sitting on the sidewalk smiling before he even saw her, but the smile died the moment a black car parked a few meters away. From inside came Rodrigo, impeccable suit, Swiss watch glinting in the sun. Rodrigo paused on the phone, laughing loudly, and then his eyes met Raphael's. Time stood still. "Raphael," he said, his voice thick with disbelief. "What the hell are you doing there?" Clara looked from one to the other, confused. Rodrigo approached, examining the dirty clothes. "Is this some kind of secret social project?" Clara frowned. "Project?" he murmured. Raphael felt a blood drain from his face. Rodrigo opened his mouth to say something, but Raphael jumped to his feet. "Rodrigo, not now," but it was too late. His partner looked at Clara, then at him, and said loudly enough for her to hear, "This man is Rafael Montero, Clara, owner of the richest man I know." A deafening silence fell. Clara looked at Raphael as if he had just shattered her world. There was no shouting, no anger, just a silence too heavy for two people to fit. "Is it true?" he asked, his voice firm and low. Raphael opened his mouth, but no words came out. Rodrigo, realizing what he had done, backed away embarrassed and walked away. Only the two of them remained, and the sound of cars passing by. "Is it true?" Clara repeated, and now her voice was trembling. "Clara, can explain." "Explain what?" "That you tricked me, that you pretended to need help." She was breathing quickly, her eyes welling up. "I brought food. I took time away from my son to take care of you. What do you think I am? An idiot?" Raphael tried to get closer, but she backed away. "Don't touch me." That refusal hurt more than any scream. "I just wanted to know if anyone could truly love me," she confessed, and the sentence sounded too fragile in the face of her fury. "So you used mindkiness as a laboratory." Her voice was now a cold whisper. "Congratulations, Mr. Montero. You have become another one of my exciting stories that end in disappointment." And with that, Clara turned and began to walk. Raphael stood still, watching the woman who had restored his faith in humanity walk away with stiff shoulders, as if carrying the weight of the world, and yet Miguel's drawing burned in his pocket like a silent accusation. It was the beginning of the fall. The disguise had cracked once and for all, and the price of Trujos just been announced, but Raphael still had no idea how much it would cost. Raphael walked aimlessly until night swallowed the city. The sun set without ceremony, and Snow Paulo lit its electric fireflies as if nothing had happened. But inside him, a blackout. The revelation had come without anesthesia, crushing in seconds what had taken days, perhaps years to build. Trust, connection, delicacy. Miguel's drawing weighed in his pocket like a wet brick. Family, he had read earlier. Now, Freud, his conscience read. He thought about calling Rodrigo, about raging, about blaming chance. Trueno, one needs to be blamed. Only courage, and courage, at that moment, was admitting one's unbetrayed. Who had collected victories, experienced the defeat that educates most, that of hurting the one he most wanted to protect. He slept badly, because guilt has a strong grip. In the little sleep he managed to get, he dreamed of Clara passing by him like the people on the sidewalk, without looking, without speaking. With a thought he woke with the stark certainty that he needed to talk to her, not to absolve himself, but to clear the debris from his path so she could pass. He dressed simply, not for disguise, but for real. Clean jeans, a light-colored shirt with no visible brand. He got out of the car a block early and entered the building where Clara worked through the mortal's revolving door. The lobby was a cathedral of glass, marble, and haste. The security guard, Mr. Dimas, recognized him from afar. "Mr. Montero." Raphael nodded humbly. "I came to talk to Clara Noguera." He waited in a discreet armchair as if awaiting sentencing. People passed by, some greeting him, others taking hidden photos. Fame is also a kind of invisibility with a spotlight. When Clara appeared, the wheels of the cleaning cart cut through the silence. She saw him and stopped a few feet away, her eyes hard as the polished floor. There was no hatred there. There was wariness, the most dangerous of affections. "What are you doing here?" she asked, without flourish. "I came to ask for your forgiveness," she said, her voice low. "I don't have the right, but I have to." Clara breathed through her nose, as if lifting weights. "We have nothing to talk about." She tried to sidestep, and he carefully stepped in front of her. 5 minutes. I promise to be brief, true, and leave." The heads around turned like indiscreet sunflowers. "You want to make this another one of your exiting stories?" she asked bitterly. "If you want an audience, I'll get applause." Raphael swallowed hard. "I want silence, actually. And I want you to know that I ruined the most precious thing I had, your trustee hid behind an experiment because I was afraid. Afraid of not being loved for who I am. Afraid of being just a bank, a surname, a headline. And using your heart to test mine was a coy coward." The word landed with just the right weight. Clara pursed her lips. That didn't cleanse them, but it opened a crack. "Why should I listen to you?" she murmured. "Because I need to give you back what I took from you. The right to look at me without fantasy. I'm Rafael Montero, yes, but I'm also the guy who wants to learn how to sweep the floor he dirtied." She didn't answer. The elevator dinged. "I have work, I know," he said, and looked down. "I messed up work and I messed up yours. Family. I won't insist." He took a step aside. The scene could have ended there, but fate likes to push the narrative forward when it hesitates. "Today at 6, in the square," Clara said without looking at him. 5 minutes. Only 5. He entered the elevator. The doors closed like two tired eyelids. Raphael sat down again, but inside he was on his knees. There was Houpatini, but alive. At 6, the square smelled like an afternoon that regrets the heat. Raphael arrived first and, in a gesture both foolish and genuine, wiped the bench with his hand. Clara came unhurriedly, like someone going to the doctor, not out of choice but out of necessity. She sat 2 feet apart. "Speak," he breathed. "I didn't come to justify myself. I came to assume my lead. I hid, and I hurt you. I deserve whatever comes. I just want you to know what was real. Every conversation, every silly laugh in the rain. Every time I came home thinking about proposito, be someone better because you exist." Pause. "And what wasn't real?" she replied. "The character, the way he spoke, the lunchbox he received as theater. I wanted to believe I was just a man, but I am a man with privileges, and thinking I could put on and take other people's lives as a costume was abuse. Finally, something I can understand," she said dryly. "Abuse is the right word." The silence thickened. "I brought you food, Raphael. I took it from my son. Do you understand that?" He nodded, his face burning. "I do. And that's why I'm not here with a check." She looked up, surprised at his audacity and anticipating temptation. He opened his pocket, took out an envelope, tore it open calmly, and laid the pieces on her lap. "I thought about it. The easy answer. Money. But money is a shortcut that kills. Dignitov, whom I say I love. I don't want to pay a price. I want to deserve your good morning one day. I don't want to pay a price. I want to deserve your good morning one day." The symbolic gesture didn't move her, but it did dismantle the predictable scene. "You won't buy me and you won't convince me with pretty phrases." He warned. "I won't convince you," he said. "I'll tow here and accept your no as I should." The words found a seat in her heart. "So hear me. I need time. I need to heal from the idea that I was made a fool of, and I need to understand if what I felt was true love or just my desire to see the best in people." He nodded. "I'll wait as long as it takes. Don't promise what you can't keep," she snapped. "I don't know if I'll ever forgive you." He held her gaze, vulnerable. "Neither do I, but I know what I can do now. Disappear when you ask, and appear only when you call." She stood up slowly, as if finishing a shift. "I have to go. Mom needs a shower. Miguel has math homework. And life doesn't stop because we get hurt." She took 2 steps, then turned around. "Raphael, yes, don't do anything for us in secret. Not fruit at the bakery, not free medicine, not even the school cafeteria. If you respect my boundaries." The blood rushed to his face. Caught. "Okay. I don't." "Fine." She crossed the street without looking back. There was no forgiveness there. There was, and borders of the salvation after dignity and trust was demolished. Raphael returned to the penthouse not as someone returning but as someone introducing himself. He went up to his office and turned off the lights on the awards on the shelves one after the other. The room was dim. He picked up his leather-bound notebook and wrote, "Today I learned that fog of Nesbings to fit in the know." Then he called Rodrigo. "You expose me," he said, without embellishment. On the other end, the silence of a partner who knows he made a mistake. "I was an idiot," Rodrigo admitted. "But so were you. What the hell were you thinking?" "In true," he replied, almost laughing at the paradox. "And in courage, I failed at both, but maybe there's time to learn. Friendship, like love, survives on sincere simplifications." "I'm here," said Rodrigo, this time without an opinion. "Thank you," and he hung up. Some support works precisely when they have an opinion. The evening, which would otherwise have been filled with a business dinner, turned into a workshop of silence. Raphael washed his own dishes, something he had always outsourced, and discovered that the sponge is also a sacrament. Scrubbing the dish a second time when the grease is stubborn is a learning experience. Resilience at his fingertips. He tidied up his closet, disposed of donations scheduled by assistants, and single-handedly assembled 3 bags of clothes in good condition, not to distribute, but to take to a center that knows every name, line, and face. He wrote a note to Marina, the housekeeper. "I want to learn how to do the weekly shopping. Can you take me to the market tomorrow?" Marina responded with a drawn heart and the sentence she had once said, "Big words fit big people." Across town, Clara arrived home and slumped on the couch for 5 stolen minutes. Mrs. Lush noticed everything with a mother's eyes that are a magnifying glass and a shelter. "He spoke to you?" It wasn't a question. Clara nodded, fiddling with her tied-up hair. "He spoke, you heard, and I'm angry, Mom, at the lie. And at me." "Don't hurt yourself, daughter," said Donna Lucia, pulling her hand into a lap that smelled of ointment and vanilla. "Who hash a pie is always more hurt, because it opens the door wider." Clara rested her head on her mother's shoulder. "I gave him food, Mom. I gave Miguel time. You gave him what you are. That's never a mistake. It was his mistake." Silence. "I think you should rest. We'll think about it tomorrow." Mothers in exciting stories. They know how to pause the world when their daughters forget. Miguel appeared in the living room wearing dinosaur pajamas, carrying a calligraphy notebook. "Mommy, did you see the drawing I gave the guy with the cap?" Clara took a deep breath before answering. "Yes, did he like it?" "I think so. Is he your friend?" The question dropped like a stone in the water. "He's someone Mummy is getting to know." Miguel accepted the half answer because children trust the curb. "True, so tomorrow I can draw another one." Clara smiled, and the smile was the first crack of the night. Tomorrow you draw us eating Brigadeiro and him." "Not him, why?" "Because Brigadeiro is for today." "Family." Miguel nodded, satisfied with a logic that adults often complicate. On Saturday, Raphael left early with Marina for the market. It was a choreography he hadn't heard before, choosing fruit by smell, comparing the price per kilo, drinking decision with a team. Every simple thing seemed like a lesson in being a person. At the checkout, he let a lady go ahead with 2 cartons of milk. It was only when she thanked him that he realized his heart was widening at gestures that wouldn't make headlines. He went home, cooked rice that was almost good, beans that needed more salt, and meat with too much garlic. Learning is accepting being a beginner, and there is no transformation ugly phase. In the afternoon, he took his car, not the sports car, the more discreet one, and went to the square. He hadn't arranged anything. He wasn't expecting anything. He just needed to look at the empty bench and respect it. Respect Clara's no as one respects a shrine. He sat down, opened his notebook, and wrote a letter he might never deliver. "Clara, today I brought nothing. No plan, no money, no cliché. I only brought one request, that you remain whole, with or without me. And if there ever is a return, may it be through the door. If there isn't, may I learn from the privilege of knowing you." He closed the notebook slowly, as if completing a ritual. On Sunday he did something even more costly. He didn't stop by. Not by chance. Not "I just dropped by to see if ... double quotes." He unlearned the impulse to control. Instead, he called his own therapist, someone he'd kept in inactive mode for months, and rescheduled sessions. "I want to talk about purpose and how I use people as a mirror," she said. The therapist, an expert at not being surprised, simply wrote down the time. True change begins this way, with commitments that don't shine. Monday brought the smell of coffee and possibility. Raphael introduced himself to the company with a newfound humility. He called the team together, apologized for absences, reassigned projects, and, in a gesture of ... courage, delegated the management of a major contract to a talented manager he had been underestimating. Choices that plant the future. As he left the room, he saw a short message on his cell phone today at 6 p.m. 5 minutes. It was from Clara. His heart beat with the embarrassed joy of those who know that a reunion with the one we love is an examination of conscience. Little Square was windy, and the bench was dusty. Clara arrived punctually, her hair tied back with a pencil, the expression of someone who had strengthened herself by saying no out loud to herself throughout the day. "I thought," she began, without prelude, "I thought about everything, about what you said, about what I felt, and I decided that forgiveness, it's not a magic eraser, it's a path. If you want, you can walk it slowly, without money, without spectacle, and with a rule, any rule," he said, without blinking. "You'll meet my mother, Miguel, the small kitchen, the broken tile in the bathroom. If you want to know who I am, come see me up close. If you can't handle it, you'd better leave now." How the word kitchen functioned there as a sacred word. Kitchens are where true lives without makeup. "I want to," Raphael said, and she wanted so loudly that it was audible. "Today, 7:30, she determined. "Take just you." The phrase smacked of his old habit of solving things with his own hands. He nodded. grateful for the clear instructions. Before leaving, Clara unzipped her bag and took out a small note. From Miguel, she explained, without pretense. Raphael read it. A drawing of 3 people and a dog which they didn't have, with an arrow pointing to a 4th person outside the frame. Not yet. He laughed with his eyes. That boy is a prophet. He's a hopeful realist, she corrected, and the smile finally spread across his tired face. At 7:30, Raphael climbed the stairs of the old building with a shyness he hadn't felt since adolescence. He knocked on door 23 and heard footsteps, voices, the scraping of a chair. Clara opened the door unceremoniously, and the air of the house welcomed him like a hug. Warm pots, plain soap, a drawing on the wall that Mrs. Lusahay appeared with his cane and a look that weighed heavily and supported at the same time. "So you're the guy who messed with my daughter's head," he said, flatly. "It's me, ma'am. Sit down. Here we talk with our stomachs and our minds." Miguel appeared with a toy car in his hand and a ready question. "Do you know how to play Uno?" "I know how to lose. Sometimes then you can come in," decreed the 6-year-old judge. The small table received 4 dishes and a sincere silence. Raphael praised the seasoning and, accidentally, got the name of the parsley right. Clara raised her eyebrow. He lowered his eyes. "I'm a bad cook," he confessed, and they laughed. A brief laugh, but they laughed together. After dinner, Donna Lucia excused herself and called Raphael to the window. "I'm not afraid of you," she said, with the authority of someone who has seen enough. "I'm afraid of what you don't know," he nodded, because he had no better defense than vulnerability. "I came to learn. Learning hurts," she warned, "but it hurts clean." "I accept clean pain," he replied, and the phrase anchored the night. When he left, Clara followed him into the hallway. "Don't get used to it too quickly," she said, without hostility. "This is no guarantee." "I know," he replied. "I'll take it slow, and no big promises. No big promises. See you tomorrow, if you want." The correction humanized him and she noticed. "See you tomorrow," he repeated, and that was enough for the chapter to close, not with a lock, but with a chain. On the street, Raphael leaned against the cold bodywork of the car and took a breath. It wasn't a happy ending. It was a true beginning. Life change. There is no credits music. There is a shopping list, a sleepy child, an unwashed pot, and it is on this floor that true love sprouts slowly, when we learn not to crush the sprout with forest anxiety. The story now had a new setting, the 23rd house, a new grammar limits, and a golden rule, true before gesture. But like any self-respecting plot, the world outside kept turning, and outside the window of house 23, high up in a glass tower, numbers were moving, partners were doing the math, journalists were sniffing out stories. Someone from another chapter is already sharpening the question that threatens this purpose endborn. How far will your courage go when true charge again? The rules of starting over, coexistence, limits and silent tests. The morning after dinner at house 23. The city seemed to be playing the same music as always, but Raphael heard another beat underneath, a percussion of, like someone learning to breathe without noise. He left early, not for the sidewalk with his cap, but for the market on the street behind Clara's building. Donna Lucia's list was simple, and precisely for that reason. Sacred: beans, rice, garlic, 2 tomatoes, parsley, and as much fruit as he could fit. He read the "as much as he could fit" twice and understood that therein lay the mathematics of dignity. Enough, not too much, what is necessary, not just showing off. With almost jeweler-like care, he chose unblemished bananas, 3 apples, and an extra orange for Miguel's smoothie, and took a deep breath at the feeling that life change you can start between vegetable stalls and chat with the market vendor. Clara, from the window, watched him round the corner with a plain bag, no expensive designer, nothing that screamed "I'm saving someone." She also saw that he didn't get upstairs. He sat on the park bench, took a notebook out of his backpack, and began writing. Clara's heart recognized that stubbornness, that courage that does not demand applause. In silence, the mind listed the list that she herself had created for this new beginning. No money as a quick fix. No promises that can't be kept. No future sold on credit with interest or frustration. If there was true love there, he would need to know how to cook over low heat, 2 ingredients at a time, stirring slowly, without burning. That was the thought that led her to the intercom to say, "Come by at 7. I brought a piece of the world for you to learn." When 7 arrived, Raphael entered with the humility of someone asking permission to enter a memory. The kitchen was full of smells, garlic and oil, pots murmuring, the ritual that had always done more for him than any therapy. People cooking for people. Mrs. Lucia Shea held out an apron and declared, "Today, the young man is the one chopping the onion. If you cry, no one will notice." He laughed and accepted, trying to hide his fear of the cut and the judgment. As he cut, he listened to the conversation of those women who knew how to keep the house going even when the world was falling apart. Clara spoke about cleaning the 23rd floor, the stuck elevator, her mother's medication schedule, Miguel's reading lesson in between one sentence and the next, something it was really taught there: patience, routine, purpose without manifesto. Miguel appeared with a deck of Uno cards and a straightforward question. "If you lose, can you have dessert anyway?" Raphael blinked, appreciating the moral contract, and said yes, but with a rule. Whoever cheats washes the dishes. Miguel accepted, content to live in a world still governed by clear laws. Family, Raphael thought. It's a country with internal rules that you only learn by living there. The game was full of laughter, small provocations, theatrically placed by two, and a don't look at mom's cards that brought to the table a joy he hadn't known. In that silly game, Raphael's heartfelt connection that he always looked for in meeting rooms, without ever finding it. After dinner, Mrs. Lucy asked him to go with her to the laundry room. There, among buckets and clothespins, Clara's mother practiced a rare kind afteroo. I observe a lot, Mr. Raphael. You have the hands of someone who hasn't had to wash clothes in a sink, and the eyes of someone who's spent little on what matters. I don't mean any harm. I say it because my daughter is born like a bird. She always comes first. Those who love Clara need to know how to fly together without breaking their wings. He listened with the posture of a student and replied, bluntly, I came to learn. I want to be the kind of man who doesn't weigh down others. She narrowed her eyes, her brow furrowed, and offered a near compliment. Good humility cooks the beans faster. In the days that followed, the restart made a quiet noise, and that was the test. Raphael learned about medication schedules, the list of things to do before missing them, Miguel's way of organizing pencils by color, his habit of Miss Lucia leaving the dish towel on the edge to remind you that life always hangs somewhere. In return, Clara observed his conditioned reflexes fading, fewer offers of I can pay, more questions of how can I be together. In Raphael's head there was the daily conflict. The old instinct to solve with money rose like lava, and he needed to contain it with choices small but radical. Keep your hands still, open your ears, practice Sevilla the place of control. One night, the elevator broke down. Miguel, already in his pajamas, remembered that his homework was on the ground floor, in the building's mailbox. Raphael volunteered. He went down the 4 flights, then went up with shallow breath and the inaugurated happiness of someone who does something they can't outsource. On the way back, he received a gentle scolding from Clara for wearing socks. A cold floor with a cold is a punishment. He laughed like someone learning a new law of physics. For someone accustomed to helicopters, navigating stairs in an old building was ... resilience of ego, and that is the muscle of affection that hurts the most when it grows. Rodrigo, on the corporate side of the story, sensed the transformation with the precision of a skeptic. Did you disappear to live a soap opera? He teased, but without the usual bitterness. Raphael responded with his newfound sincerity. I disappeared to live life. His friend remained silent for a second longer and changed the subject, as if he didn't want to touch where he might weaken. Beneath it, however, a strange respect began to blossom as, between exiting StorySand spreadsheets, the partner saw that perhaps Raphael's script was indeed not a whim. The world, however, doesn't stop for us to learn to love. 2 weeks later, a journalist messaged Raphael asking for an interview about the CEO's human side. Someone had photographed him entering the simple building with bags. The words human side lit up like a trap. It was the kind of headline that steals the Atruato surf click. He took a breath and said no, thank you. He closed the door on a narrative that didn't belong to him. Clara knew the next day, when she saw the notification on his phone while he was following a cornmeal cake recipe. Did you say no? She asked, without accusation. Yes, good choice. The word good was a breadcrumb on the path of forgiveness. One windy afternoon, Raphael arrived at the square with his notebook, not to write, but to read. He opened a page and found old notes on goals. Expand to 3 countries. Double revenue, acquisition, X, and in shaky, recent handwriting. Be someone Miguel can look at and say, I want to be like that. Purpose definitely. He had a proper name and a real audience. He closed the notebook with the care of one closing a reliquary and, on a calm impulse, sent a message. Can I pick up Miguel from school today? Clara's response took longer than usual. Yes, but arrived 10 minutes early. He hates leaving last. The subtext lay in the test. Can you keep to the deadline? Not an empty promise. Raphael arrived 15 minutes early. He stood in the shadows, smelling the smell of recess snacks and everyday life. When the bell rang and the wave of children exploded onto the sidewalk, he saw Miguel scanning the world with radar-like eyes. Upon finding him, he smiled the smile that would bring down generals. You came. It wasn't a question. It was an audit. Connection on the way back. They discussed serious matters, the corrosive effect of chewing gum under the desk, the 1 point for littering policy, and the plan to become an astronaut doctor to take care of people in space. Raphael listened with reverence and, for the first time, felt a raw desire to be alive to see a exciting story that boy was still going to tell. Later, after Miguel's bath and his medicine, Mrs. Lucia Clara called Raphael to the balcony. The clothesline held up clothes like flags of countries fighting discrete wars. We need to work something out, she said, adjusting a clothespin. I know you want to help. To see, but true help respects time and process. If you skip steps, I'll push you away. Not out of malice, but out of malice. He nodded with new maturity. I'll make mistakes sometimes, he confessed, but I'll make small mistakes, and I'll apologize big. Good apologizing big saves small worlds. Clara took steps toward the forgiveness, not to oblivion, because forgiveness, in that universe, was a method, not a miracle. The following week, House 23 needed a shower repair. Raphael reflexively picked up the phone. "No," Clara said calmly, "that's really Mr. Raphael's job." He laughed, accepted the challenge, and dismantled the shower with tutorial videos and a humility that, months ago, would have seemed humiliating. As the water finally reached the right temperature, Mrs. Lucia gave a small smile worth a holiday. "It made the shower talk, it made me listen," he replied, unsure why the phrase sounded so right. The shower became a discreet symbol. Afrasila thought, no one applauds. Solving what can be solved without buying applause. And then came the Sunday that redrew the maps. Mrs. Lushahi felt ill. His breathing became shallow, his blood pressure fluctuated, and his body screamed for help. Clara almost called an ambulance, but Raphael, calm and focused, provided first aid. He elevated his legs, checked his symptoms, spoke softly, and called the health center. He didn't offer a private hospital. He offered his presence and method. At the emergency room, he stood in line with his sus card, without using his contacts or using privileges. Vulnerability creates invisible bonds. It was in that line that Clara looked at him and saw more than the businessman. She saw someone willing to stay in there. When they were finally seen and the medication started, Mrs. Lucia fell asleep. Clara rested her head on his shoulder on the hard aisle bench. She didn't say thank you. She said, "I'm tired." And he responded with the only thing that truly soothes, "I know. I'm here." On the way back, already dark, Clara broke a brick from the wall she had built between them. "Today, if you weren't here, I would have fallen apart." He swallowed his tears with good pride. "Today, if I weren't here, I would have lost myself." It was there that forgiveness said the surname process. Andrew Lovelost, the fear of his own name. There was no kiss. There was no soundtrack. There was water in the filter, socks on feet, a blanket tucked in, the things that save. But, as always, the outside world sharpens its blades. On Monday, a business portal's headline published a lopsided note. "Billionaire CEO in an affair with a cleaning lady." Photos raised suspicions. Two poorly cropped images. Raphael with bags, Clara entering the building. The text insinuated, not said. The poison lies in what's underlying. Rodrigo called furiously. The PR team panicked. Advice was on the line. Deny it. Keep quiet. So Raphael took a deep breath and did what Thetranu demanded. He opened the article for Clara before she could see it from others. In the kitchen, the cell phone on the table became a new kind of evidence. "Do you want to get away from this?" he asked, ready to lose. Clara read without trembling, like someone reading bills. "You know what? I've already taken enough stones from people who never looked me in the eye. If it's going to hurt, let it hurt with us standing." He looked up. "Butane condition. No one uses this to promote neither you nor your company," he nodded firmly. "I promise Yaltra without a display window." The news brought a storm. Venomous comments, curious, hypothetical interests. Miguel heard jokes at school and, for the first time, returned silent. That night, he asked Raphael, "Will the bad people win?" "Sometimes they win a little," he said, choosing each word as if pulling out thorns. "But they don't win the end," Miguel thought, accepted the theory, and asked for a drawing before bed, for people holding hands now with the dog right in the middle. To distract the gossipers, they laughed, and Mrs. Lucia decreed, "Whoever laughs trips up despair." Raphael, deep down, knew that courage would be tested in the coming days. He also knew that love, if it wanted to be more than a plot device, would have to wade through the mud of the real world without losing its shoe. He opened his notebook and wrote a plan that wasn't about cleaning up his own image. It was about protecting the territory of House 23, codes of silence, contact times, different routes, an agreement to disappear when necessary, choice tactics, so that connection would not be swallowed up by the spectacle. By the end of that week, the square was empty and the bench was worn from enduring so many important conversations. Clara arrived with an old coat and a new outlook, less fear, more energy. "Are we going to continue?" she asked, without poetry. "We will if you want an F-true fit every day, whether it fits or not. We push against the wall," she replied, half laughing. And then, as if changing the subject but setting a milestone, she said, "Tomorrow you'll go with me to the gas station to get my mother's recipe. Afterward, we'll stop by Miguel's market. He wants to show you the drawing of the solar system, but in his own way. That's how great artists solidify, not in fireworks, but in the choreography of small commitments. Transformation Real has this normal look. As they said goodbye, the wind carried a sound that history hadn't quite heard yet. Footsteps of someone prowling from afar, watching for a gap in the chaos. There were too many eyes on House 23, gossip in glass corridors, and a friend of a friend curious enough to sell the next chapter to the highest bidder. A true had been chosen. Now would come the test of the public square. The patient wooden bench seemed to already know. Some promises hold up even under Buzand. It is in them that true love recognizes itself. And before the scene closed, one last image remained in the frame. Raphael, alone on the bench, writing a question in his notebook, not for Clara, but for himself, and, who knows, for whoever reads it. Are you ready to lose what doesn't matter to protect what matters? He closed the notebook without an answer, because the real answer only fits in the next chapter. When the world decides to charge admission to everyone who dared to say yes, life changed the storm of exposure, trials, pressures, and the trial by fire of truth. The next morning, the world seemed to wake up a little more gossipy. Clara noticed this when her phone vibrated 5 times in a row before Miguel even put on his sneakers. Garbled messages from fellow students, neighbors, even a former nursing classmate she hadn't seen in years, all with the same tone of concern. Is this true? Girl, be careful. Double quotes. He must be playing a trick on you. The Business Portal's article had spread its insinuations like oil on a sidewalk, impossible to erase without slipping. Clara's jaw clenched, her heart racing and her thoughts repeating. It was supposed to be just hours. While Miguel hummed the alphabet, she swallowed the metallic taste of shame that shouldn't have been hers. Across town, Raphael read the comments on the screen with the practiced composure of an executive and his stomach churning. She's pulling a broomstick, said one. Another rich man paying for emotional therapy with a poor woman, said another. Each sentence was an attempt to assassinate Therignauticula, and that hurt him more than any personal attack. The press office kept calling, proposing image strategies with polished phrases that reeked of well-paid lies. Deny involvement, say it was a social action, show donation data. Raphael took a deep breath and refused them all. For the first time, true, it wasn't a reputational risk. It was an anchor. And anchors, he thought, aren't for flying, they're for staying afloat. But the storm had long arms. At school, Miguel returned with his head down. The drawing of the solar system crumpled in his hand. They said, "Mommy is taking advantage of you." Raphael knelt down, looking at the boy. Some people talk without knowing, and sometimes those who don't know are afraid of what they don't understand. Miguel looked at him with a seriousness unlikely for a Are you going to leave because of this? Raphael felt his knot rise, but he answered firmly, "No. When we want to build a family, doesn't run away when it starts to rain." In that short sentence, the child hot, and Clara, who was listening at the door, hard comment mantanned that confused her more than any slander. The next day the storm gained a microphone. A local radio station invited Raphael to clear up the rumors. He declined again. Rodrigo, this time, didn't laugh. "You're risking everything you've built." Raphael responded with the calm of someone who has already tested its worth and its worthlessness. "If what I've built collapses because I'm in love with, so I built it wrong." Rodrigo remained silent, because logical arguments don't win over people who have finally found Still, he warned, "Get ready. They're going to dig up everything about her," and they did. Within hours, websites unearthed Miguel's father's abandonment, her absences from college, Donna Lucia's health condition. They exposed her scars as if they were proof of guilt. Clara wept, hidden in the bathroom at work, her knees drawn to her chest, remembering that she hadn't chosen this war. She had chosen only to be kind to a stranger. Now her life was filled with malicious headlines and other people's opinions. When she emerged, her eyes reddened by allergies. She found Raphael waiting downstairs with 2 simple lunchboxes and a sober look. "They're destroying you because of me," she said, without greeting. "They're trying, but they can't, because they don't know you." His voice didn't tremble. It was the kind of firmness that didn't shout. "You shouldn't be here," he whispered. "This is exactly where I should be," he replied, corrugate. "That's not the absence of fear, it's choosing to stay trembling." They went upstairs together, ignoring the eyes hiding behind cell phone screens. In the apartment, Mrs. Lucia had the radio turned up loud so as not to hear the building's gossip. When he saw them, he turned down the volume and pointed to the kettle. "The water's boiled. Help yourselves. The world is too lukewarm." The 3 sat down, and Raphael told them everything. The invitations, the pressures, the crisis advice. "And what are you going to do?" the old woman asked, her voice tired but firm. "Nothing. Just live life." "True," slowly. Mrs. Lucia, he looked at Clara tenderly and at Raphael with a test. "Then you need to learn to walk with cloth armor. Out here, simple people only survive with courage discreet." Little by little, public curiosity began to grow weary of its own cruelty. Like all gossip, the storm lost its strength when it found no spectacle to feed on. Raphael and Clara continued their daily lives, homework, their mother's exams, slow dinners, household repairs. But the silence wasn't a relief, it was a truce, and they knew the small rituals that kept them going. Him writing in his notebook before bed, "True love, oh, need to know how to wait." She deleting notifications before looking. Miguel cutting up old newspapers to make collages of planets. Each gesture was a brick of resistance, a way of saying that life change is built more behind the scenes than on stage, until, on a gray Friday, the website published a new headline. "Millionaire and cleaning lady visit children's shelter, marketing or miracle." The photo showed Raphael and Clara holding hands, surrounded by smiling children. The visit had been discreet, with no photographers, no agenda, just an ordinary Saturday, because Miguel wanted to donate his old toys. Someone at the shelter had taken the photo and sold the story. Now, it was spreading like gasoline on rails. Raphael looked at the screen, then looked at Clara. They'll keep trying to transform our connection into a show. Clara took a deep breath. So we turned the show into purpose. That's when they decided to take control of the narrative, not to defend themselves, but to protect what they were building. They recorded a short video in the living room of House 23, no makeup, no professional lighting, just the three of them in their daytime clothes. Clara spoke first. It wasn't a fairy tale. It was an unlikely encounter between two people from opposite worlds, trying to learn to walk on the same ground. Raphael added, I lied at first. She forgave me slowly. We're rebuilding, with mistakes and successes, but with true. Miguel, in the middle, held up a drawing of 4 people and a dog and said, this is all family. They posted and turned off their cell phones. In the following hours, the video became a chain of exiting stories in social media. Some mocked, many remained silent, and thousands commented with phrases dripping with tenderness. Thank you for proving that kindness still exists, I cried. It reminded me of my mother and stepfather. You gave me back my hope. Was not universal approval, it was something rarer, respect. And respect is the first step towards public oblivion, the one that allows us to live without an audience. In the early hours of the morning while the house slept, Raphael lay awake on the balcony with his notebook open and the view of the city no longer intimidating. He wrote one last sentence before closing his eyes. If we survive the world's opinion, perhaps we deserve to live what we feel. He tucked the notebook away like an amulet and, for the first time since the storm began, slept peacefully. The storm wasn't over, but they had learned to dance with the wind without letting go of each other's hands. And now, the world would need much more than rumors to dismantle what... True love began to rise. But, downtown, someone was watching the video on their cell phone with a lopsided smile. He wasn't curious, nor critical. He was a strategist. And he already saw in this unlikely story not a romance, but a golden opportunity. The kind of opportunity that can test not only but the exact price of each conviction. The next chapter would come with a proposal tempting enough to shake even the foundations of House 23, the tempting proposal, the price of choice, and the risk of losing everything on Monday morning. Montado Tech's glass-enclosed building reflected a sky far too clear for the weather swirling behind the scenes. Rodrigo, sitting in his minimalist office with expensive furniture and short patience, drummed his fingers on the table as he waited for Raphael. When his friend entered, his steps lighter than a CEO's should be. Rodrigo was direct. Did you get the email from the Orion Group? Raphael nodded unhurriedly, like someone facing a storm with a deliberately punctured umbrella. In Rodrigo's mind, there was disbelief and also fear. Orion was an international conglomerate willing to buy Montado Tech for a historic sum, but with one explicit condition: a clean public image. In other words, Clara was out of the equation. Raphael sat down, folded his hands, and remained silent for several long seconds. Rodrigo seized the opportunity. It's the chance of a lifetime. An obscene fortune. You could retire, disappear on a yacht, live off dividends and podcasts. Raphael smirked, a smile that mixed irony and melancholy, and disappear from myself again. Rodrigo rolled his eyes in exasperation. You've changed, man. You used to talk about legacy. Now you sound like a sidewalk poet. Raphael took a deep breath. Before, I confused legacy with wealth. Now I understand that legacy is whoever holds your hand when everything falls apart. It wasn't a pose. It was transformation, the kind of change that leaves old partners without a map. Meanwhile, in House 23, Clara was facing a different kind of proposal. An image consultant, discreetly sent by someone from the PR team, appeared with a professional smile and a black folder. She wanted to prepare her for her new public role. She offered etiquette lessons, new clothes, social media management, and an interview behavior guide. Clara listened to everything with the neutral expression of someone learning to cook rice while the house was on fire. In the end, she responded with a serenity that startled the woman. I'm not running for office. I'm just trying to live my life. Real life. When the consultant left, Clara locked the door and leaned her forehead against the wood. That night, Raphael appeared quieter than usual. Miguel rushed to show him a rocket made of paper rolls, but noticed the weight on his shoulders and whispered to his mother, "Uncle looks like a sad planet." Clara smiled tenderly and replied, "Some planets only shine when it gets dark." After Miguel fell asleep, they went out onto the balcony. Raphael told her everything. Orion's proposal, the billions involved, the veiled condition that his personal life not tarnish the brand's image. Clara remained silent, watching the city that seemed to be receding inch by inch. Turmoil inside her, the fear of being the reason for his downfall, the doubt about her right to exist in the equation, and a pang of wounded pride for thinking that their love could be a stain. Raphael watched her like someone staring at a precipice that is also a path. If I sign, I win everything, and I lose us. The sentence came out low, but thick as lead. If I don't sign, I lose billions, and maybe my entire company. Clara took a deep breath. And what do you want? He hesitated. For the first time in years, he had no ready answer. I want what can't be sold. There was the crux of it. Life changed, discovering that certain achievements only come when you accept losing the wrong ones. Then choose with your heart, not your wallet, she said, but her voice was shaky. Because the heart, she knew, can also deceive. The next morning, Raphael walked into the office as if heading to a secret trial. The company's board waited with spreadsheets, forecasts, and hungry eyes. Orion's proposal was seen as salvation, the golden ticket to corporate immortality. Raphael listened in silence. When asked about his decision, he didn't immediately announce it. He told a story, exciting story instead, about a woman who gave him bread when he seemed invisible, about a boy who drew him on a piece of paper and called him family, about a simple home that healed more than all the spas and retreats money could buy. He concluded by saying, "If to grow I must amputate what gave me back my soul, then I'd rather stop growing." The silence that followed was so thick it was hard to chew. And then, with a clear voice, he declined the offer. The news leaked before lunch and set the financial markets ablaze. Stocks plummeted, experts declared him insane, columnists mocked the CEO's romantic decision. Rodrigo stormed into the penthouse that night, furious. "You threw away the future for a cleaning lady." Raphael remained unfazed. "I threw away what they called the future to build what I can call life." Rodrigo slammed the door shut, a shadow of respect hidden in his fury. Anger, after all, is just wounded admiration. Raphael stood alone on the porch, listening to the chaos outside while his chest paradoxically felt at peace. For the first time, he had chosen something without calculating the return, and that made him feel whole. Across town, Clara heard the news on TV from a bar. She was returning from work and stopped to buy bread. The newscast said, "Billionaire turns down biggest offer of the year," with a tone of astonishment. Her hands trembled, not out of vanity but out of fear. Vulnerability, it has this side effect. When someone bets high on you, your heart becomes hostage. She arrived home and found Raphael sitting on the floor with Miguel on his lap, the two of them putting together a puzzle. "Are you crazy?" she asked, trying to sound angry. "Maybe, but if it is crazy, I want to live inside it." Miguel held up a piece and announced, "Only the edges are missing." Clara looked at them both and thought that perhaps that was exactly it. They were putting together the edges of something new and fragile. In the early hours of the morning, Raphael didn't sleep. He wrote in his notebook, in a firm handwriting, "Whoever puts that true love above fortune does not lose wealth, the exchange of currency." Then he turned off the light and watched the shadow of Clara and Miguel sleeping on the sofa. He had made Aquas a that the world would call madness, but that finally made him capable of loving without fear. Still, outside, the gears of the world turned with resentment. Orion didn't accept silent defeats. And someone inside Montero Tech had just warned, off the record, that they had a new plan. If they couldn't buy Raphael, they would try to destroy him. And so the game changed. Now it was no longer about money, but about survival. And Clara, still without knowing it, was about to discover how much it costs to love someone who the whole world wants to see fall. The counterattack, when the world tries to destroy what it doesn't understand. The first arrows didn't come from Orion, but from within. The air at Montero Tech grew colder. Doors that had previously stood open began to close before Raphael walked by. Meetings were scheduled without his knowledge. Smiles turned into grimaces as soon as he turned his back. The message went without saying. By refusing the billion-dollar offer, he had ceased to be the hero of growth and become the villain of lost profits. Some directors began to spread rumors that he was unstable, too emotional, involved with someone who manipulated him. They didn't mention Clara by name, but her shadow lingered like an unwelcome ghost in the glass corridors. Across town, Clara also began to feel the siege. The building manager at her office began monitoring her every move, as if she'd been cleaning less since she'd appeared on TV. Her colleagues whispered when she entered the locker room, some jealous, others afraid of being associated with the scandal. Even Miguel's school called her talk a fancy euphemism for saying he'd been distracted, as if sudden happiness were a nuisance. Clara left the meeting with a heavy heart. Dignity, she thought, is to carry on with her life calmly even when everyone tries to snatch it from her hands. At night, when she saw Miguel sleeping with his arms stretched out toward the wall, as if searching for someone even in his sleep, she swore she wouldn't let the world's evil shatter that security. Meanwhile, Orion abandoned diplomacy. An anonymous dossier began circulating in the financial press, vague accusations of accounting fraud, balance sheet manipulation, shady contracts. Rodrigo put his hands to his head. "They want to ruin your reputation until they force you to sell cheap." Raphael read the dossier without blinking. He knew it was false, but he also knew that true is not enough when the world wants to believe the lie. "And what are you going to do?" Rodrigo asked, distressed. Raphael responded with a calm that irritated his partner. "Survive, and keep loving." It was the serene stubbornness of someone who understood that courage. It's not about making noise, it's about remaining silent when everyone is shouting at you to disappear. The pressure mounted the following week. Investors began withdrawing capital. Employees demanded explanations in increasingly aggressive emails. Journalists camped out in front of the company's headquarters, waiting for any At Clara's building, phrases like fortune hunter and broom scam began appearing graffitied on the gate. Miguel saw one of them on his way to school and asked, "Mom, what's a scam?" Clara swallowed hard and replied with a forced smile, It's when someone tries to steal something that doesn't belong to them. But we didn't steal anything, we just met. The boy nodded but remained silent the rest of the way, as if trying to understand why the world hates what it doesn't understand. Raphael realized he could no longer protect Clara by simply remaining silent, so he made a decision that nearly made Rodrigo fall out of his chair. He called a press conference. Are you going to expose yourself? No, I'm going to expose a true. Rodrigo tried to stop him, reminding him that journalists don't want facts, they want blood. But Raphael knew. Lies only win where he appears, embarrassed to show his face. And if he wanted to save the company without selling his soul, he'd need to prove he still had one. On the day of the press conference, the auditorium was packed with cameras, flashes, and disbelief. Raphael entered alone, without a suit, tie, or advisors. He told everything: his decision to live as an invisible person, his encounter with Clara, his mistakes, his initial lie, the forgiveness, her and what she learned from House 23. That companies grow with spreadsheets, but people grow with connection. Showed photos of the project they were working on together to renovate the shelter where Miguel had donated the toys. If this makes me less of a businessman and more of a human being, I'll accept the title. The comments spread across social media like wildfire. Some laughed, others cried. Many, for the first time, heard the name Clara without poison nearby. But Orion didn't back down. It responded by publicly announcing that it had withdrawn its entire proposal and was evaluating alternatives in the market. A veiled threat to finance competitors. Montero Tech shares plummeted again. Rodrigo, now pale, confessed, if this decline continues, the board members may try to remove you as president. Raphael closed his eyes. His thoughts were colliding. Losing the company he built with his own hands, or losing the woman who brought him back to himself. Only this time, there was no choice because there was no longer him without them. Clara sensed the burden he was trying to hide and did something unexpected. She went to the company headquarters. She arrived, dressed simply, ignored the stares, and asked to speak to the board. When she entered the room, the suits wrinkled their noses. She took a deep breath and said, I'm not a risk. I'm just someone who restored humanity to a man who was drowning in success. Some smiled dismissively. Others remained silent. He's not unstable. He's alive. If you want a robot that produces profits, choose another one. If you want someone who still believes in purpose, keep it. Then he left, leaving the room in an awkward silence, the kind that only Lero Truthkin imposed that night. Clara arrived home exhausted but with her eyes fixed. Donna Lucia, who had heard everything over the building's internal radio, summed it up with one sentence. You were the only person in that room who wasn't for sale. Clara smiled, and for the first time in weeks, ate heartily. Raphael appeared later, with a look of someone who had seen hell and come back whole. Did you become my lawyer? He joked. No, I just remembered who you are. It was at that moment that true love between the two it stopped being a feeling and became an alliance. Not a finger alliance, an alliance of resistance. Days later, the board members announced they would keep Raphael in his position, not out of compassion, but because they realized the world was beginning to root for him. Public opinion, fickle as ever, began to see him no longer as the rebellious CEO who refused billions, but as the man who dared to put humanity before profit and survived. Orion, frustrated, fell silent. The war was not won by shouting, but by silent overcoming. On the porch of House 23 that night, Raphael looked at Clara and said, We survived, she replied. No, we just started. Surviving is just the prologue. It's really living that demands it. Courage. And from somewhere far away, the wind carried a whisper no one yet knew how to decipher. Something new was about to emerge between them. Not a scandal, not a crisis. Something more dangerous for those who had always profited from cynicism. Hope with a dress. Profited from cynicism. Hope with a dress. The awakening of purpose. When love becomes collective transformation. The morning sun seemed to rise slowly, as if it too were curious to see what would come next. Raphael stood before the window of his penthouse, not with the erect posture of a CEO but with the relaxed shoulders of someone beginning to truly breathe. In his hands was a notebook scribbled with sketches of plans, budgets, and still crooked ideas. The project to renovate the children's shelter Miguel loved so much. It was more than philanthropy. It was an attempt to give back to the world what the world had unknowingly given him. Each line he drew seemed to stitch together the parts of him that Clara had rescued. He no longer wanted to simply survive Orion's attacks. He wanted to prove that it was possible to build wealth that smelled of hope. House 23. Clara prepared coffee while Miguel cut out magazines to glue onto poster board with colorful letters. Space of the Stars. That was the name he had chosen for the new shelter, with the magical logic of children because everyone there needs to shine. Mom, Donna Lucia, sitting at the table. We've watched them both with teary eyes. She knew her daughter carried her fear like someone holding a bucket of water without spilling it. Every movement had to be calculated. Even so, Clara smiled. The idea of creating something priceless, yet valuable, warmed her chest. It was strange to imagine that, weeks ago her life had seemed to be crumbling. Now she was building a dream with her own hands. It was the essence of life change, exchange despair for purpose. When Raphael arrived, the apartment was filled with electricity. Miguel ran to him with the poster board in hand. "Look, uncle, we already have a name, a logo, and even a smiling star." Rafael knelt, feigning business gravity. "Excellent branding, Mr. Miguel. Now all that's left is to conquer the world." Clara laughed, but inside she felt a shiver because she knew Rafael wasn't joking. In a few days, he gathered architects, engineers, lawyers, and educational experts. He assembled a task force with the same discipline with which he had built his company, but with a new twist. This time, he didn't want to return. He wanted meaning. "Profit buys things," he said. "Connection builds futures." The man who once measured success by graphs now measured impact by smiles. The official announcement of the project caused a media storm. Previously poisonous headlines now featured titles like "From Empire to Shelter, Rafael Montero's Human Turnaround." Influencers began posting videos of themselves, crying as they told the story of the millionaire who disguised himself as a homeless person and found ... true love, a cleaning lady. Competing companies tried to ridicule him, but the public didn't take the bait. For the first time, Rafael's narrative wasn't controlled by spreadsheets or detractors. It was driven by exciting stories that arose from each child served, each registered volunteer, each unexpected donation. The reputation they had tried to destroy began to be reborn, only stronger, because it was now sustained by something that not even markets could buy: collective affection. Clara, however, remained grounded. While journalists wanted to know about dresses, events, and weddings, she cleaned the bathrooms of her own shelter under renovation, wearing gloves and her hair tied back, sweating as much as any worker. "If you want to respect me, start by seeing who I really am," she told a reporter. And the phrase went viral more than any glamorous photo. That was where her strength lay, in dignitizalent. Someone who didn't need the spotlight to shine. Even her previously hostile co-workers began to see her differently, not as a Cinderella, but as someone who braved the mud and built a bridge. Meanwhile, Miguel became the project's unofficial mascot. He walked around the construction site in a yellow hard hat, distributing hugs and offering his opinion on where the adventure room should be placed. Donna Lucia watched from afar, excited and proud. One afternoon, when Rafael stopped for a drink of water, she approached with the calm of someone who doesn't waste words. "You gave my grandson back his laughter, and my daughter her faith." Rafael swallowed hard, feeling the sweet weight of her approval. "Actually, they gave it back to me." The woman nodded, then tried not to forget, because the worst poverty is that of the man who forgets where he came from. It was a reminder and a blessing at the same time. Some phrases are keys that unlock entire destinies. As the months passed, Espaço das Estrelas began to take shape. The walls were painted with colorful galaxies, the rooms received new furniture, and the children's library now had more books than Rafael had shoes. Children who had previously lived crammed into damp dormitories now ran around the courtyard shouting the names of planets. Social media was filled with videos showing not the businessman or the former cleaning lady, but the children's bright eyes. The project was no longer about the two of them, it was about everyone, and that was the point. Transformation, in truth, it is not measured by the glory of the one who leads, but by the joy of the one who is lifted up. Clara, however, carried a secret restlessness. At night, when Miguel slept and the world fell silent, she wondered if they were prepared for what was to come, because she knew the higher something rises, the more people root for it to fall. Her thoughts tangled together like electrical wires. The fear of disappointment, the responsibility of being an unintentional symbol, the feeling of walking on glass. Rafael noticed this weight, and one of those nights, he sat beside her on the sofa. "We're doing this together," he said, lightly touching her hand, "and together it's harder to fall." Clara rested her head on his shoulder, but didn't respond. Sometimes, silence is the purest form of trust. When the Espaço das Estrelas finally opened, the entire city seemed to stand still. Officials, artists, businesspeople, and onlookers mingled in the colorful courtyard. But the most memorable moment didn't come from the speeches. It came from Miguel, who stepped onto the makeshift stage with a microphone bigger than his hand and said, "Here, everyone will have a family to call their own." The audience burst into applause and tears. Rafael looked at Clara, and Clara looked at Rafael, and in that silent gaze, there was something no one else saw, the certainty that they were, indeed, changing the world, even if starting with a tiny piece of it. But backstage, as the crowd applauded, a man in a dark suit watched silently. On the phone, his look wasn't one of tenderness but of calculation. He represented a group of international investors who saw in Starspace not a cause, but a promising market. And there, amid the laughter of children and the fireworks, a new threat began to emerge, one that wouldn't come with direct attacks, but with offers seductive enough to confuse even the steadiest of hearts. There will still be twists and turns. The next chapter will bring the question that every ideal faces sooner or later: how much is a dream worth before someone tries to buy it? The price of a dream. When the ideal becomes currency and the heart becomes a battlefield. The fires of the inauguration had barely cooled when the proposal arrived. It didn't come by registered mail or formal visit, it arrived by email, with a cold and objective subject line: International Strategic Partnership Proposal. Rafael's expression began to harden as he opened the file. A consortium of foreign investors offered figures so surreal they seemed straight out of a soap opera. Millions immediately for the expansion of Espako das franchises in dozens of cities, global marketing. But between the polite lines lay the dagger. They demanded majority control of the project. You will be the faces, the contract stated, but not the voices. Raphael stood there, his gaze glued to the screen, his heart in silent rebellion. He knew this was the kind of invitation that destroys or corrupts, sometimes both at the same time. In House 23, Clara was drying Miguel's hair after his shower when he asked if they could open a shelter branch on Mars. They laughed together, and for a moment she forgot the world. When Raphael arrived and told her about the proposal, her smile slowly faded, like a candle in the wind. "This isn't a partnership," she said softly. "It's a disguised purchase," Raphael agreed. But there was more to it, and she noticed. "You're tempted," he sighed, sitting on the edge of Miguel's bed, who was falling asleep. "Not for the money, for the reach. We could save thousands of children." A knot grew between them. Purposely, Hopi against Tigidi was the kind of dilemma that had no right answer, just different consequences. In the following days, the proposal loomed over them like a contained storm. Advisors, former detractors, now turned enthusiasts of the project, pressed Raphael to accept. "You have no idea of the scale of this," they said. "With this capital, you can change the country." Life change, a hasty undertaking, often takes its toll on the soul. Clara was restless, washing the same dishes twice, wondering what they would lose if they accepted. Espako das Estrelas had been born from the most intimate gesture she had ever made, sharing a snack with a stranger on the sidewalk. Turning it into a global brand felt like a betrayal of Miguel's first smile, the first brick painted by her hands. Raphael, on the other hand, saw the other side of the scale. In his office, he spent sleepless nights making projections, imagining how many children could be taken off the streets, how many shelters could be rebuilt, how many futures could be saved. But every time he closed his eyes, he saw the living room of House 23, Clara smiling wearily, Donna Lucia serving tea, Miguel gluing paper stars to the wall. And he heard her voice, "If you want to respect me, start by seeing who I really am." That phrase echoed like a compass. If he accepted, he might save thousands, but he would lose what made them unique. Vulnerabilities, realizing that even the right thing can corrupt if it comes from the wrong path. One night, he took Clara to the old square where it all began. They sat on the same bench where she had given him a sandwich, and he still wore dirt-stained clothes. "If you say yes, we will have power. But perhaps it will never be us again," Raphael said, looking at the ground. Clara was silent for long seconds. "And if you say no, we will be criticized for limiting the good we could do." They looked at each other. There was no glamour there. There was fear. But there was outside connections, the kind of bond born not of promises, but of shared scars. "I can't imagine this project without my mother's smell of beans and Miguel's crooked drawing on the wall," Clara confessed. "If they take that away, they take away his soul." The next day, Raphael called a meeting with the foreign investors. They arrived in ties, with deliberately cordial voices, offering charts and slogans. When they finished, he remained silent for a few seconds and then said, "We appreciate the offer, but we are not for sale." Espako das Estrelas was born from true love, not venture capital. "We want to grow, yes, but we want to grow slowly, with roots, not rockets." The executives' smiles faded slightly. One of them retorted, "You're letting emotions get in the way of a global project." Raphael smiled back, with the calm of someone who no longer fears judgment. "It's not emotions that get in the way, it's the absence of them that destroys." The refusal made headlines and polarized the country. Some called it heroism, others stupidity. The stock market fluctuated. Journalists debated on TV shows, and hashtags like #ESTRELASLIVRES and #Montero LOUCO dominated social media. Miguel taped a leaflet to his door with crooked letters, "We are not for sale." Donna Lucia wept discreetly as she read it. "This child understands what adults don't understand," he murmured. Clara smiled, her eyes brimming with tears. That decision didn't make them immune to the consequences, but it did make them true to themselves, and that's a rare kind of truth. Karagathat does not fit into reports. Days later, letters arrived from children across the country, some with drawings, others with stories of abandonment and overcoming. One girl wrote, "I want to live in a place that smells like hugs like the ones I saw on TV." Raphael put them all in a wooden box. "This is our profit," Clara said. And for the first time since the proposal had come, she felt light. They had lost millions and gained an invisible treasure. The scene was like a photograph, the two of them sitting on the living room floor, surrounded by letters and dreams, with Miguel sleeping in their laps. This was what they were defending, not a project, but a way of loving the world. But upstairs at Montero Tech, Rodrigo was receiving a tense phone call. A large national corporation, a rival of Orion, wanted to take advantage of the refusal to attack. They planned to expose past irregularities at the company and use this to discredit Raphael. "They want to take you down once and for all," they warned. Raphael remained silent, then responded with a weary smile. "Then we'll show them that resilience. It can also be contagious because deep down, he knew the attacks didn't mean they were failing, they meant they were bothering. The next chapter would come not with golden offerings, but with ancient shadows rising to test whether they were truly made of light. Shadows of the past when ghosts tried to turn off the light when the storm was about to break out, not in the sky, but on the screens. On a morning that began to ordinary to portend tragedy, Raphael opened the news and found his face plastered next to the word fraud. A former national rival had leaked documents that supposedly proved accounting manipulation in the early years of Montero Tech. The headline screamed, "Does the Messiah of philanthropy have feet of clay?" Within minutes, the phone blew up. Advisors, journalists, clients, everyone wanted answers. Raphael stood there, staring blankly, a whirlwind raging inside. It wasn't a surprise, it was déjà vu. He knew these old contracts were legal, but ambiguous enough to be distorted. And he also knew that, in the court of public opinion, truth takes longer to arrive than gossip. In House 23. Clara was washing the dishes when she saw the news in the reflection of the TV in the living room. The sponge slipped from her hand. Miguel, who was drawing stars in the corner, looked at her curiously. "Mom, why are they mad at Uncle Raphael?" She swallowed hard, trying to sound firm. "Because some people can't stand it when someone does something good for them and asks for nothing in return." But inside, she trembled, not for fear of losing her public image that mattered little to her, but for fear that Raphael, already so marked by loneliness, would withdraw into himself again. When he arrived that evening, dejected, she didn't ask any questions. She simply placed a hot plate in front of him and said, "Eat, then we'll face the world." As he ate slowly, Raphael recounted the details. Magnocorp had hired private investigators and now demanded that he resign as president to protect Espasudas Estrellas from Haput. Damage attempts. Rodrigo supported this temporary departure, arguing that the scandal could ruin donations. Raphael listened silently, but his thoughts were racing. If he gave in, he would confirm the accusations. If he resisted, he would put everyone at risk. It was the cruel dilemma of those trying to live with dignity in a system that profits from cynicism. "They want my position, not my soul," he said finally. "But if they take my soul, the position will crumble to dust." Clara looked at him with moist eyes. "Then protect what makes you alive. We'll rebuild the rest." "We'll rebuild the rest." The next day, Raphael was subpoenaed to testify at a public hearing of the Business Ethics Commission. The building was packed with reporters and onlookers. It was like a modern coliseum. Flashbulbs like torches, cameras like spears, and he alone, like a gladiator without a shield. When the commission chairman asked if he had anything to say, Raphael did what no one expected. He defended himself not with numbers, but with ... exciting stories he talked about when he had nothing but an idea and hunger. About sleeping on the office floor, about the youthful mistakes he corrected before they hurt anyone. "I'm not a hero, I'm just a man trying to be better than I was yesterday." The room fell into a heavy silence, not of disbelief, but of shock, because raw honesty has the power to unsettle audiences. Meanwhile, the press surrounded Clara. They wanted to know if she would continue to stand by a man under suspicion. She, with the calm of someone who has weathered worse storms, replied, "I'm not standing by a man under suspicion. I'm standing by a man under attack. And the world tends to attack those who are doing it. Transformation for real." The phrase spread across the networks, dividing opinions but sowing doubts in the easy certainties. That night, Raphael returned from the hearing, exhausted. He found Clara, Miguel, and Donna Lucia waiting with a steaming pot of beans and soft laughter. It was this contrast that kept him together, being a giant out there and only being loved here inside. Days later, a twist, a former Magnocorp employee confessed that the leaked documents had been tampered with. It was a trap to discredit Raphael and seize control of Montero Tech. The news made headlines, and public opinion turned like the wind now, exalting the one he had previously crucified. Rodrigo appeared at House 23, smiling for the first time in weeks. "You won," he said. Raphael shook his head. "No, we survived," because he knew. And winning is fleeting. Boutricilian selves roots. Even though he was acquitted, Raphael emerged from that crisis marked, not as a villain, nor as a martyr, but as someone who proved that courage's not about not being afraid, it's about continuing to tremble. He began delegating more of Montero Tech to Rodrigo and dedicating his days to Espacio das Estrellas. The children ran around the renovated courtyard, and each laugh seemed to wash away the last traces of the mud they'd tried to throw at him. One late afternoon, Miguel hugged him from behind and said, "Uncle, you smell like home now." Raphael swallowed hard. Never had a compliment felt so like salvation. Clara watched him from afar with a tired, tender smile. She knew. The man who pretended to be poor to find meaning was finally discovering what it meant to be truly rich, not because he had a lot, but because he needed nothing more. Still, one last question lingered in the background, silent and inevitable. After resisting the world, would they be able to build a future together? And so it was, with that question echoing like a distant drum, that the chapter ended, setting the stage for the riskiest step of all, not to defend an empire, but to dare to build one. Family. Image 5. Love finds a home. When courage builds a family. The dawn was like a soft watercolor, casting golden light over the city rooftops. Raphael, however, had been awake since before the sun. He paced the penthouse living room, clutching a small velvet box in his pocket, as if he were too fragile for the world. The past few months had been a battlefield of battles and miracles. He had survived the attacks, rebuilt his reputation, and now, finally, he could breathe without fear of losing everything. But what haunted him most wasn't the risk of falling, it was the thought of living without Clara. True love, he realized, is not what makes his heart race, but what makes him want to rest, and he wanted to rest beside her, every day, for the rest of his life. At House 23, Clara was combing Miguel's hair for school while Donna Lucia watched from her armchair, smiling. The home seemed more alive than ever. The smell of bread, the sound of laughter, the wall covered in drawings. Clara was different still, strong, but lighter. He had returned to nursing school, taking night classes with the same determination with which he once scrubbed the floor of the clinic. Miguel now said he wanted to be a star doctor to care for the children at the shelter. And Donna Lucia, her health stabilized, was slowly walking around the house with the help of a cane. It was their transformation role, each of them growing from the love they built together. But Clara, even radiant, still harbored reservations, like someone who fears that happiness is a visitor and not a resident. Raphael knew this. That's why he planned every detail as if he were crafting a new destiny. He called Rodrigo, who offered to arrange something grand, but he declined. I don't want grand, I want something sincere. He chose the place where it all began. The little square with uneven pavement where Clara had offered him a sandwich when he was just a stranger. At dusk, he stopped by House 23 with a timid invitation. Shall we go for a walk? Clara looked at him strangely but accepted. Miguel insisted on going along, and Donna Lucia winked at Raphael as if she already knew. Even the wind seemed complicit that afternoon, blowing gently as if hoping for a happy ending. They arrived at the square as the sky burned coppery hues. Raphael led Clara to the bench where they had first spoken. Miguel ran to play near the slide, and Donna Lucia stood discreetly at a distance, leaning on her cane. Raphael took a deep breath and knelt, not out of tradition, but because that gesture seemed to convey everything he felt. Clara's eyes widened. What are you doing? The choice most certain of my life, he interrupted, taking the little box out of his pocket. Clara Nogueira, you taught me what it's like to live with dignity, showed me that Theopi can live even on a plate of rice and beans, and that true success is having someone to come home to, want to build a family with me. For a second, the world stopped. The air caught in her lungs, her eyes welled up, her soul wavered between fear and love. Then Clara laughed, crying a short, shaky, beautiful laugh. You still scare me sometimes. You know, I'm scared too, he confessed, his voice breaking. But I'd rather be scared by your side than safe without you. Tears flowed, and she nodded slowly. Yes. Miguel, noticing the scene, ran over, shouting. She said yes. Raphael picked him up and spun him around, while Donna Lucia applauded, her eyes brimming with tears. It was the kind of moment you can't photograph, only keep in your memory. The wedding took place months later, in a simple flower-filled garden next to a Spaco das. Children from the shelter served as flower girls and page boys. Rodrigo walked awkwardly into the room carrying the rings and crying in secret, and Donna Lucia walked arm in arm with Clara down the aisle. There was no luxury, but there was connection, true in every look, every gesture, every smile. Raphael swore to love her not for what she does, but for who she is. Clara promised to remind him every day that life is worth more than profits. When they said yes, the applause seemed to come not only from the guests, but from the walls that once heard their silent outbursts. Some yeses change resumes. This one changed destinies. This one changed destinies. Love finds a home. When courage builds a family. The dawn was like a soft watercolor, casting golden light over the city rooftops. Raphael, however, had been awake since before the sun. He paced the penthouse living room, clutching a small velvet box in his pocket, as if he were too fragile for the world. The past few months had been a battlefield of battles and miracles. He had survived the attacks, rebuilt his reputation, and now, finally, he could breathe without fear of losing everything. But what haunted him most wasn't the risk of falling, it was the thought of living without Clara. True love, he realized, is not what makes his heart race, but what makes him want to rest. And he wanted to rest beside her, every day, for the rest of his life. At House 23, Clara was combing Miguel's hair for school while Donna Lucia watched from her armchair, smiling. The home seemed more alive than ever. The smell of bread, the sound of laughter, the wall covered in drawings. Clara was different, still strong, but lighter. He had returned to nursing school, taking night classes with the same determination with which he once scrubbed the floor of the clinic. Miguel now said he wanted to be a star doctor to care for the children at the shelter. And Donna Lucia, her health stabilized, was slowly walking around the house with the help of a cane. It was their transformation raw, each of them growing from the love they built together. But Clara, even radiant, still harbored reservations, like someone who fears that happiness is a visitor and not a resident. Raphael knew this. That's why he planned every detail as if he were crafting a new destiny. He called Rodrigo, who offered to arrange something grand, but he declined. I don't want grand. I want something sincere. He chose the place where it all began. The little square with uneven pavement where Clara had offered him a sandwich when he was just a stranger. At dusk, he stopped by house 23 with a timid invitation. Shall we go for a walk? Clara looked at him strangely but accepted. Miguel insisted on going along, and Donna Lucia winked at Raphael as if she already knew. Even the wind seemed complicit that afternoon, blowing gently, as if hoping for a happy ending. They arrived at the square as the sky burned coppery hues. Raphael led Clara to the bench where they had first spoken. Miguel ran to play near the slide, and Donna Lucia stood discreetly at a distance, leaning on her cane. Raphael took a deep breath and knelt, not out of tradition, but because that gesture seemed to convey everything he felt. Clara's eyes widened. What are you doing? The choice most certain of my life, he interrupted, taking the little box out of his pocket. Clara Nogueira, you taught me what it's like to live with dignity, showed me that Theo P can live even on a plate of rice and beans, and that true success is having someone to come home to. I want to build a family with me. For a second, the world stopped. The air caught in her lungs, her eyes welled up, her soul wavered between fear and love. Then Clara laughed, crying a short, shaky, beautiful laugh. You still scare me sometimes, you know. I'm scared too, he confessed, his voice breaking, but I'd rather be scared by your side than safe without you. Tears flowed, and she nodded slowly. Yes, Miguel, noticing the scene, ran over, shouting. She said yes. Raphael picked him up and spun him around, while Donna Lucia applauded, her eyes brimming with tears. It was the kind of moment you can't photograph, only keep in your memory. The wedding took place months later, in a simple flower-filled garden next to Espejo das Estrellas. Children from the shelter served as flower girls and page boys. Rodrigo walked awkwardly into the room carrying the rings and crying in secret, and Donna Lucia walked arm in arm with Clara down the aisle. There was no luxury, but there was connection, true in every look, every gesture, every smile. Raphael swore to love her not for what she does, but for who she is. Clara promised to remind him every day that life is worth more than profits. When they said yes, the applause seemed to come not only from the guests, but from the walls that once heard their silent outbursts. Some yeses changed resume. This one changed destinies. Months later, their routine seemed like a miracle disguised as quotidian. Raphael took Miguel to school before heading to the shelter. Clara divided her college shifts, with afternoons teaching hygiene and self-care to the children in the project, and Donna Lucia cooked for the volunteers, telling stories of when everything seemed impossible. Montero Tech thrived in the hands of Rodrigo, now the majority partner, while Raphael discovered that true greatness lies not in building empires, but in protecting the small worlds where affection resides. You seem happier, Rodrigo commented one day. I am, Raphael replied, because I finally have someone to return to. The final scene was as if painted with light. Late afternoon, Miguel sleeping on the couch between them, Clara and Raphael holding hands in silence, while the sun gilded the living room of house 23. No headlines, no noise, just the peace they had so long sought. After losing almost everything trying to prove he was worthy of love, Raphael understood. Love doesn't need to be earned, it needs to be nurtured. And so it was that, after so many battles, the man who pretended to be poor to find love discovered that the greatest life-change way is simply allowing yourself to be loved as you were. Now that you've walked through every detail of this story, stop for a moment and look at your own life. How many times have you chased shiny things and missed out on what truly matters? How many people around you might just be waiting for a gesture of attention to blossom? And the most important question of all, have you been the kind of person who builds bridges or walls? Because, in the end, it's not about status, possessions, or applause. It's about courage to truly love, about having dignity to do the right thing even when it's scary, and about choosing connection instead of vanity. That's what changes the world. That's what changes us. And maybe the next great chapter of your life begins when you stop trying to impress and start simply loving. If this story touched you, share it with someone who needs to believe in love and hope. Again, hope.and. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and activate notifications to continue learning how to transform pain into strength and build a life with purpose every day.